Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to my channel, Outdoor Pursuer. As you can see from the title of this video, I build my first PC. So this channel is primarily about spending time outside, outdoors, getting involved in activities that, that let you be outside. So hiking, kayaking, fishing, hunting, anything along those lines. But in order to put out some of these videos and to edit some of the photos that I post and also schoolwork, business, etc., a lot of that does require having a desktop or a very good laptop. And you'll be able to see through this video, so my setup that I use, so I have my personal laptop that I do a lot of my editing on for videos, and then I also have a computer that I use for schoolwork, and that's pretty much all I use it for is schoolwork. Both of these devices work well, no issues with them, but I wanted something, a PC is something that I have wanted personally for quite some time, and so I finally did this. And the intent of this video is not at all to be a guide. I'm by no means an expert on any of this sort of stuff, but I just wanted to share this experience with you on someone who isn't super tech savvy and building their first PC and what it's like. So now that I have this PC and I've built it, I intend to use the PC to, for schoolwork, for editing videos and editing photos. I do plan to use it for gaming. I love being outdoors and I love spending time outdoors. I love hunting and fishing. But something else that I like to do, I do like to play video games, and so I will also probably use it for some video games. But that's not its main purpose. Its main purpose is going to be more for work, and just having that capability of something that might have more storage, is quicker to work with, is a little more user-friendly. So I hope you enjoy this video. Yes, so again, I'm not tech savvy, and so I followed someone else who already had this PC planned out. It's a blueprint, if you want to call it that. So I'll leave a link to that guide. It's also another YouTube video. But I'll leave a link to that guide as well as a link to another YouTube video that I referenced because it's a good video. And it's a great guide, but I had a lot of questions going through it. Again, I'm not super tech savvy, and so, feel free to use both of those, check them out. And I'll also leave a link to each of the components that I used for this PC build. Pretty much all of the components that I bought, or that I used for this build, I purchased through Amazon. I'm sure you can find them at other locations, but that was what I used. So sit back and enjoy the video. So the first step in this PC build is going to be to clean up the work area that I currently use, and just clear some space so that way I have a clean location to put together this PC. Now that I have a clean work surface, the first step is going to be getting out the motherboard. Now the motherboard that I used for this build was an MSI MPG Z490. This particular motherboard has Wi-Fi capability, so that way I don't have to purchase an additional component in order to ensure that my PC has Wi-Fi. One thing to keep in mind with the motherboard is that static can ruin some of the components on the motherboard, and so there are special static free gloves that you can purchase and use those when putting together the PC. I didn't use this, but if you wanted to take that extra precaution, that's something that you can do. Another option would be to use, so the packaging that the motherboard comes in, you can set the motherboard on top of that, and that should help reduce some of the static that you may encounter while putting together this PC. Our next component is going to be the CPU, or the central processing unit, and for this I used the Intel Core i5, the 10th generation CPU. On your motherboard, there is a socket area where you're going to insert the CPU. There's a little lever on the side of the socket where you can, when you push it down, it should open. When you pick up your CPU, you want to make sure that you hold it by the sides. Don't hold it from the top or the bottom, as this can bend some of the prongs that are on the CPU. While holding the CPU from the side, there should be a little arrow that you want to line up with an arrow that is on this socket area, and that is going to be the direction that you want to put your CPU in. So while holding it from the side, you just want to gently drop it in, make sure that those arrows line up, and then you want to bring the lever down and lock the CPU unit in place, and you can tuck the lever back in so that way it doesn't pop back out. Next component is going to be our RAM, and for this I used the Crucial Ballistics. I only used 2 RAM, but the particular motherboard that I used, you can use up to 4. I don't anticipate on needing more than the 2 sticks that I have. RAM, on the other hand, stands for Random Access Memory. And so after unboxing these units, there's 4 slots. As I mentioned, you can use up to 4, but I didn't anticipate needing any more than 2. Anyways, depending on your motherboard, you'll want to, there's little locks on the end of where these RAM sticks go in, and you would just want to pull those back so that way you can insert the RAM sticks, and you want to line those up with the notch that is in where the slot goes. So you insert the RAM by pressing these down, and you should be able to hear an audible click, indicating that the RAM is inserted all the way where it should be. For this particular motherboard that I was using, you want to use slot 2 and slot 4. When I say slot 2 and slot 4, I mean from the CPU unit, count 1, 2, 3, 4 to the edge of the motherboard, and then it's 2 and 4. Our next component is going to be the SSD, or solid state drive, and for this we are going to use the Crucial P5 M.2. On this particular motherboard that I used, there's a M.2 slot, SSD slot, where first you have to remove a cover, and then after removing the cover, then you can put the SSD in place and you can set the cover back on. To remove the cover, it is a smaller screwdriver that you want to use, not a normal size screwdriver, and I highly recommend that you locate or purchase a smaller screwdriver with a smaller Phillips head, because I did not have one at the time, and using a normal screwdriver, it can be done. I was able to get it off, but it would make it much more easier and efficient if you had that smaller screwdriver, which I did end up going and get, and it made it a million times easier to put it back. When inserting the SSD drive, there is a small screwdriver that should come in with your motherboard set, and you're going to want to put this small screw in to hold the SSD in place before setting the cover back on top. As you can see, this took a really long time because I did not have the proper screwdriver. Eventually I got there though. Our last component that we're going to put together with this motherboard before we move into the case is going to be our CPU fan. And this is going to help cool down the CPU from overheating. CPU fan that I used for this build was the Be Quiet Shadow Rock TF2. So this particular CPU fan comes with different mounting brackets, and if I'm being honest, it was a little difficult to figure out which mounting brackets to use particularly. Hopefully you can tell from this video which brackets I used. I did try to help indicate that. When putting together this CPU fan from the back of the motherboard, there are screws that you want to insert. There should already be slots that you can insert them. And then after you've inserted those, there are C-clips that came in with the CPU fan that you should be able to hold those screws in place. From the front of the motherboard, you're going to clip those screws in place using the C-clips. As I mentioned, the CPU fan comes with different mounting brackets, and so you want to select which mounting bracket you want to use, and then you have to put those together on the CPU fan. This CPU fan already came with some thermal paste on it. Before you would mount the CPU fan, you would want to put some, if your CPU fan didn't come with it, or if you want to use your own, you're more than welcome to, but before you would mount the CPU fan, you want to make sure that you cover the CPU unit with some thermal paste, and then you can mount the bracket on, and you can mount the CPU fan on top of that. And this is again to help prevent your CPU unit from overheating. That thermal paste is really important. They have a little bit of flexibility in which direction you want to mount your CPU fan. For me, I chose to mount the cooling tubes towards the RAM, and this orientation seemed to fit best on this motherboard. But just depending on what motherboard you have and its layout, you would be able to kind of you have some flexibility on how you want to arrange that. This isn't the only type of cooling unit that you can use for the CPU. There are water cooling CPU units as well, which I don't know too much about. Again, I'm not super tech savvy, but my understanding is that these water cooling units work better than a standalone fan. However, I don't intend on pushing this PC way past its limits, and so I didn't feel like a water cooling unit was necessary for this build. There was a little bit of difficulty trying to mount this CPU unit, as it's a little difficult to reach down in there and tighten the screws to lock the CPU unit in place. It is manageable, but just something to keep in mind. Also lining up, because on the brackets where these bolts line up with where it should mount, there's different spacing that you can use, and so just lining it up properly was a little difficult. I would recommend mounting the brackets first, maybe, and then attaching the CPU unit to those brackets, and that might work a little easier than the way that I chose to do it, but you can get there using the provided equipment that is within the motherboard box and the CPU fan box. All right, moving on to our actual case now. This is where the PC starts to actually look like a PC. And so for this, I use the Be Quiet Pure Base 500DX. After unboxing the case and removing any plastic that might be covering it, go ahead and take off the side panel, both side panels, that is, for this particular case. So you have the front one, which is a glass covering, and then you're going to have the back panel that you also want to remove, so that way we can be able to do our wire management and plug in cables and such. Alright, once you have both of the sides removed, you want to go ahead and take your motherboard and line it up. There's going to be, for this particular motherboard, there were nine, or there might have been 8, I lost count, but I believe there were 8 screw holes that you would use to screw the motherboard into place onto the case. You just want to gently lower this down, and for this particular case, there was a fan at the back of the case that you will see I had to move up to the top of the case because the motherboard wasn't going to fit in there with where that fan was situated, so I had to move it. After you've lined up the motherboard with those screw holes, go ahead and screw it in place. So in addition to our M.2 SSD, we're also going to use a 2.5-inch SSD, the Crucial MX500. This is going to be located at the back of the case, and there's a mounting bracket that you want to go ahead and screw this onto. Later we'll plug this in with a SATA cable. So the SATA cable will run from this SSD to the front of the motherboard. Alright, next up is our hard drive, and for this I used a 2 terabyte hard drive. Here we have a hard drive cage that is located at the bottom of our case. You want to go ahead and remove this. I'm going to go ahead and move this hard drive cage, and there's a couple ways that you can install this, but for me I went ahead and screwed this in place. You can just clip it in place, but I felt like screwing it in would be a lot more secure. Initially you'll see me here where I am screwing it into the bottom. On the bottom there's 2 different hard drive racks that you can screw it in, and I screwed it into the bottom one first, but then I later on moved it up to the top one just so that the SATA cable could reach a little easier, rather than really trying to have to stretch it to that bottom one. So those are our main components for the most part. At this point we're just going to go ahead and work on plugging in some of our wires and kind of get those out of the way, so that way it makes it easier to install our graphics card and our power box. So some of these cables could be slightly confusing, but there are locations around the motherboard to plug in the fans. That was the first thing that I tried to situate. And then there's the SATA cables that you can try and plug in. On this particular motherboard where the SATA cables plug in, there's also a USB port cable that you would also plug in. I'm not going to claim to be an expert on this, and watching the 2 videos that I've linked down below might help to explain a lot more on where these wires get plugged into. Our second to last component is going to be our graphics card. For this I use the NVIDIA GeForce RTX. For the graphics card, at the back of our PC case, there's going to be a few wire mesh brackets that you want to remove. That way you can install the graphics card. The graphics card should just slide right into the slot. For this, on this particular motherboard, it's located directly below the CPU fan combo. And then you just want to go ahead and screw the graphics card in place so that way it doesn't fall out. And now for our power unit. I used the Be Quiet Straight Power 11 power unit with 750 watts of output. To install our power unit, at the back of the case there's going to be a power unit box, or there's a bracket that you want to remove. You're going to screw this to the front of the power source. After that's installed, then you want to go ahead and plug in all of our wires, and this will make it a lot easier to feed these through the back of the case rather than install the power unit and then try and plug them in, as the hard drive is going to be in the way somewhat. And so to plug this in, you're going to have the main power cord, which will get plugged into the front of the motherboard. You're also going to have the SATA cables and some graphics cords. Graphics cords. Okay, one thing to keep in mind is that if you're watching a guide and it's referencing HDMI, but your cables don't have HDMI labeled on them, VGA should be the same thing as HDMI. You just plug those in place of where HDMI would go. For a lot of this, it's just best to reference your manuals that come within the boxes. After you've plugged in all of the cables, go ahead and slide the cables through the back of the PC case and install your power unit. From here, you just want to go ahead and plug in all of your cords in their respective places, and so SATA cables are going to get plugged into the components that need SATA. And so that's going to be your hard drive and the SSD on the back of the case. Go ahead and plug in your main power cord to the motherboard. And then plug in your graphics. For this, it might potentially be the HDMI or it could be the VGA. For me, it was the VGA. And this took me a little while to figure out because I'm not super tech savvy, but eventually I got there and I was able to plug in all of the correct cords. And that is your PC put together in a nutshell. From here is just going to be booting up the system and making sure that it works. Now this wouldn't be a complete PC build without upgrading to a monitor as well. Alright, and so the monitor that I went ahead and decided to use was a 24-inch Fire Legend gaming monitor. You may already have a monitor. If you don't, just go ahead and put the monitor together. And once you have that together, then you want to go ahead and plug in the HDMI cord to your monitor. And you actually plug in, instead of plugging in the HDMI cord to your motherboard, you actually want to plug in the HDMI to your graphics card. And now, the moment we have all been finally waiting for, will this PC turn on? In 3, 2, 1. Oh, we have a false alarm. Let's try that again. 3, 2, 1. It's turned on. And just take a look at that RGB unit on the RAM. It's pretty impressive. Okay, now that we know the PC works, we can go ahead and put our panel back on, both panels. I've already put the back panel on, but here you can see I'm putting the front panel on, the glass panel. Now that we have the complete unit put together, next we need to install Windows. So you want to go ahead and get a flash drive that has at least 8 gigabytes of storage, and you want to go ahead and go into the Windows website and locate where you can download Windows 10 or 11 at this point. This particular PC supports Windows 10, does not support Windows 11. And once you've downloaded that, then you want to go ahead and plug in your memory stick into the front of the PC, and Windows 10 should automatically start to download to this PC. After that, then you just want to go ahead and run through the setup, and when selecting where to store the Windows 10, you want to select your largest storage device on your PC.
Many hours later. Many hours later.
And there you have it. Working PC with Windows. From there, you can just install whatever apps, programs, etc. that you want. For me personally, as I said, I'll probably use this as a editing computer. I will use it for some gaming, so I'll probably download Steam. I will also download and install all of my editing software, and I will also use this for school, so it's going to have Microsoft Windows, it's going to have Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Excel, etc. It's going to be used hopefully for business projects in the future. The next clips that will be shown are just going to be some before and afters of the different setup that I have going on. Now, as I mentioned before, I had a personal laptop and I had a laptop that I used for school. I'm going to use the laptop. I'm still going to continue to use the laptop for school, and I'm just going to use the personal laptop more as a second screen that's going to allow me to have information pulled up and just use it as a reference more to help me in all of the different projects that I will hopefully be able to work on. At some point, I would like to do a dual monitor setup, and then I will also still have the PC to use. Alright guys, if you made it to the end of this video and you stuck with me in making this and building this PC, again, I know I'm not the most tech savvy. I probably didn't use all of the appropriate terminology for everything, but I hoped that maybe this video showed you that even for someone like me, again, who isn't super tech savvy, is able to build a working PC that at the time of recording this outro is still working. So it's probably been about a month or so, and the PC is working fine. I haven't had any issues. I don't see it overheating. I haven't really played any games on it again since I built the PC, which was about a month ago. I was recording all of that building and then this intro and outro stuff around the holiday time, and so it's again, with the holidays, I really didn't have a lot of time to really use the PC, but I have used it some. The internet works fine on it. I've installed Windows, but I haven't activated it yet, and so I'm not able, from what I can tell, I don't have Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, etc., any of that on it, but the internet works fine, and I've downloaded Steam, so I know some of that stuff works. Kind of rambling there, but again, I just want to say thank you for watching. I really hoped that this video maybe encouraged some of you that are thinking about building a PC but aren't sure that they would be able to do it. Trust me, if I can do it, you can do it, and so I encourage you to go ahead and just go for it. You know, if you don't have to have the most impressive PC build there is. There were 7 main components that you need for the PC to work, and just find those components that are compatible together but are still within your budget. And just go for it, because it's really satisfying looking at this PC over here to my right and just, which is your left, but just looking at it and knowing that I put that together, I built that, and it's working is pretty cool. So if you're thinking about it, I recommend that you do it, because it's really neat just to look at it and be like, yeah, I did that. Yeah, so I mean, thank you for watching. This channel again is more focused on outdoor stuff, but I just wanted to share this with you guys. If anybody's thinking about it, and they just want to up their setup, and have a PC setup rather than just using laptops. Laptops are nice and they're portable, but having a full PC just makes workflow a lot smoother and gameplay a lot smoother if you're into gaming. So, yeah. Again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you outdoors.